Once upon a time there was a hospital in a small town that was the subject of dark legends. The building was built in the 19th century and has witnessed many painful fates. As the years passed, the hospital lost its original glory and became a place that everyone avoided. In the 1950s, something mysterious happened. At night, strange noises were heard in the hospital. Moans, whispers, and even the ghosts of shadows sliding across the walls. Doctors and nurses who had left the place claimed that the ghosts of dead patients now roamed the corridors and wards. One day, a group of inquisitive teenagers decided to put these rumors to the test. They entered the hospital through underground tunnels that once transported patients. Here they encountered a cold that penetrated their bones and a darkness in which even their own thoughts were lost. As they walked through the abandoned corridors, the teens began to hear footsteps following them. They turned around, but saw no one. Fear gripped them and they hurried onwards. Suddenly, the frozen air around them began to fill with whispers, as if the ghosts were trying to give them some kind of message. They decided to check the wards where the sick used to lie. In one of them they saw an old bed on which lay something resembling a shadow. It moved as if the darkness had come to life. Boldly taking up a lantern, they illuminated the dark place. On the bed lay a weathered suit left over from a long dead patient. Just then they heard a scream that pierced the air, and all went quiet. The teenagers rushed for the exit, but the doors slammed in their faces. They found themselves trapped in a forgotten world of suffering and death. The shadow on the bed took shape and began to approach. Fear encompassed them more and more, and they realized that they were not alone in this forgotten corner of time. The ghosts of the hospital had awakened from their age-old slumber, ready to share their suffering with those who dared to disturb their peace. From that moment on, no one dared to enter this gloomy place. Moans and whispers occasionally came through the abandoned windows, reminding them that inside was once a hospital, but now it had become something much more mystical and sinister. A few days after the disappearance of the teenagers, their friends and relatives decided to conduct their own investigation. Rumors of mysterious events in an abandoned hospital spread through the city, and some daring groups of people decided to test their courage by going into the heart of evil. A group of 3 brave young men decided to take matters into their own hands. Armed with torches, cameras and recording equipment, they entered an abandoned building. From the first moments, they felt the dampness and the cold that seemed to permeate their skin. As they passed by forgotten wards, the group heard whispering and crying. Their torches revealed shadows moving slowly in the darkness. Sounds were heard in the rooms, as if old beds creaked under the weight of unseen creatures. But they kept going, even as their nerves were stretched to the limit. Climbing up the old staircases, they found themselves in the quarters for psychiatric patients. Here, the atmosphere became even more tense. The walls seemed to absorb the fear and hopelessness experienced by those who had once been here. Suddenly, one of the group members felt his hand begin to grow cold. He turned around and saw the ghostly face of a young girl who stood in the corner, reaching out to him. She whispered something unintelligible, and he felt the chilling cold of a piercing gaze. At that moment, the torch in the hands of another member of the group began to flicker, and his camera gave out a strange noise. They heard footsteps approaching from both sides, and a quiet crying sounded in the room. Suddenly all the lights went out, and the group found themselves in complete darkness. Their hearts beat faster, their breathing became heavy. They stood in absolute silence, feeling that something mysterious surrounded them on all sides. The next moment they heard a whisper that spoke their names, urging them to stay. They rushed towards the exit, pushing each other in the darkness. When they ran out of the building, they found that their torches and cameras were no longer working. The abandoned hospital was once again engulfed in darkness, as if it had absorbed their fear and left parts of their souls in it. From where the teenagers stood, faint moans and cries could be heard. The abandoned hospital continued to keep its dark secrets, attracting those who dared to disturb its peace. Since then, no one has dared to trespass within its walls, leaving the building forgotten as a source of unease and secret mysteries. Some time after the incident, the story of the abandoned hospital became an urban myth. Many people avoided the place, and only desperate adventurers dared to go there. But even among them, there were those who sought to unravel the mysterious phenomena that shrouded the forgotten building. One day, a world-renowned paranormal researcher came to town. His interest was piqued when he heard rumors of a cursed hospital. Determined to solve the mystery, he assembled a team of paranormal experts and headed for the abandoned building. The expedition began with a detailed analysis of the building. Old medical reports, eyewitness accounts and local legends. They explored every corner of the hospital, spending nights recording sounds and noting down any anomalies. Despite the professionalism of the team, each member felt the heavy burden of the unknown hanging in the air. On the first night of the expedition, something strange happened. All the sensors and instruments used to measure electromagnetic fields and temperature began to behave inappropriately. The cameras were recording something that was impossible to discern with the eyes. When they played back the recordings, they heard not only moans and whispers, but also something that seemed to be the voices of those who had once been associated with the place. In one of the chambers, the researchers encountered the ghost of a young girl. She was pale, with an invisible gaze that seemed steeped in eternal sadness. She did not speak, but her presence was so powerful that the team members felt her pain and loss. The expedition concluded that the abandoned hospital bore the brunt of much human suffering. The next day as they left the site, their last look at the building left them with mixed feelings. They realized that this hospital had borne witness to tragedies, and their research was to help the souls of those who had been lost to time. Since then, the abandoned hospital has been the subject of study for various groups of researchers, and its mysterious past remains one of the most enigmatic moments in the history of this small town. A few months after a paranormal investigation took place in an abandoned hospital, strange events began to occur in the town. Residents reported hearing moans and whispers coming from the direction of the abandoned building at night. Some claimed to have seen ghosts emerging from the ruined walls of the hospital and lurking in the darkness. Local newspapers began writing articles about the cursed hospital, and soon the place became an object of interest for the curious and the brave. One group of journalism students decided to conduct their own investigation and find out what was really going on. The team consisted of 3 students, Anna, an experienced reporter, Max, an inquisitive photographer, and Jake, an ambitious videographer. They decided to spend the night inside an abandoned hospital, armed with cameras, microphones and glowing torches. When they entered the hospital, the air was unaccustomedly cold and the atmosphere was tense. They walked through dark corridors, hearing whispers and moans that seemed to come from all directions. In one of the wards, they found an ancient book of patient records, recording their suffering and illnesses. Moving deeper inside, they encountered the shadow of a young girl. Her ghostly eyes looked at them, full of longing and pain. Jake tried to ask her a question, but she simply disappeared, leaving a cold wind behind her. They decided to sit down in one of the rooms and conduct an interview, recording their conversation. In the course of their conversation, they learned that the souls of dead patients still wander around looking for rest. The girl told them that horrible experiments on people were performed here, and their suffering permeated the walls of the hospital. Suddenly, all the lights and cameras began to flicker, and a cold shadow appeared in the room. They felt invisible hands touching their shoulders and heard whispers calling for help. They felt the pain and suffering of the past seep into their own beings. With fear in their eyes, they ran out of the hospital, realizing that they had awakened something far more powerful than they had imagined. Their story left an unspeakable impression on the town, and the abandoned hospital became a place everyone now avoided, realizing that within its walls lurked secrets better left unsolved. Some time after the events in the abandoned hospital, the town began to discuss what had happened. The students' stories were flying around, and many residents were incredulous. But among those who still believed in the reliability of the stories began to appear those who dared to find out the truth. One local journalist, named Lillian, was determined to investigate. She was known for her predilection for the truth, even if it was dark and frightening. Lillian assembled a team of people, including a paranormal expert and a technician, and traveled to the abandoned hospital armed with advanced equipment. The first nights passed with no obvious signs of paranormal activity. The group conducted experiments, measured electromagnetic fields, and carefully recorded all anomalies. However, when they decided to spend the night in the psychiatric wards, the atmosphere became heavy. Suddenly, moans sounded, as if the ghosts of the past had awakened from their sleep. Computer screens flashed with indeterminate images, and the temperature in the room dropped rapidly. Lillian felt invisible hands touching her skin and voices whispering dark secrets of the past in her ear. They decided to ask questions, speaking to the souls that seemed to be trapped within these walls. And then, as if in answer, the young girl they had seen earlier reappeared from the shadows. Her voice was full of sorrow as she spoke of life in the hospital, of the suffering and hurtful experiments that had turned this place into a prison for souls. Next was a series of shadows and dark figures, as if ghosts from other eras had risen from their graves. They danced around the group, leaving traces of their agony in the air. Lillian realized that here was an army of lost souls, and that her investigation was the key to freeing their souls from centuries of suffering. The group left the hospital, but it wasn't just the ghosts of the past that left with them. They left their mark on the building, the recordings, sounds and testimonies that Lillian used to tell the story of the place to the world. Since then, the hospital has become an object of study and discussion, and the town has begun to change its attitude towards it as a testimony to dark times, but also an opportunity for healing and repentance. Lillian, with her unique ability to tell stories, decided to share what she learned in the abandoned hospital with the world. She wrote an article detailing her encounter with the souls and their suffering. The article was published in the town's newspaper, and it soon caught the attention of people not only from the area, but also from afar. Following the publication of the article, research and discussions on a scientific and spiritual level began. Paranormal experts, psychologists and researchers of the history of mysticism began to analyze the events in the abandoned hospital. Lillian and her team's reports became the basis for further research. Shortly after the article was published, the local authorities decided to change the fate of the hospital. The building was declared a historical monument, and a program of restoration and preservation began. In light of the new developments, many residents of the town felt that the hospital now carried not only dark secrets, but also the possibility of rebirth. Specialists in mystical phenomena came to the town to investigate further. They suggested purification rituals to help the souls, and also claimed that the hospital could become a kind of bridge between worlds where souls would find peace. People from different parts of the country began to visit the city to learn more about the events and to participate in spiritual practices. Gradually, the hospital became a place of pilgrimage, where visitors sought not only to learn about the past, but also to get closer to the spiritual world. During the restoration of the building, documents confirming the suffering of the patients and the inadmissibility of the experiments were discovered. This was an additional argument in favor of preserving the hospital as a historic site, a reminder of the importance of respect for human life. The abandoned hospital, once filled with fear and gloom, has now become a symbol of rebirth and hope. Its corridors, once filled with secrets and suffering, have become a witness to change, a story that emphasizes that even in the darkest corners of the past, a bright future can emerge. Soon after the abandoned hospital became a place of renewal and spiritual transformation, strange and eerie events began to occur in the city. The first signs of malaise appeared among those who were actively involved in the restoration and research. People began to complain of sleepless nights, visions and strange dreams. A group of young researchers, inspired by the success of the project, decided to spend a night inside the hospital to penetrate deeper into the mysteries that remained hidden. Once again, they took along cameras, recording equipment and glowing torches. After sunset, a strange stirring began inside the hospital. Sounds, uncertain footsteps and moans that seemed to grow louder and take on something inhuman. They went up to the first floor where the psychiatric wards were located, places where patients had once experienced horrific experiments. In one of the wards, the researchers heard whispering. They resolutely pointed their torches into a dark corner, where the vision of a young girl reappeared. But this time her eyes emitted not sorrow, but a sinister light. She was whispering names to them, foretelling them of something dark that was about to happen. The atmosphere grew more tense by the minute. The lanterns flickered, as if something was trying to break out of the darkness. And suddenly, the room was filled with ghostly shadows, deformed with distorted faces. The explorers felt dark forces infiltrating their own selves. In panic, they rushed for the exit, but the doors seemed to jam shut. The shadows overtook them, and they felt invisible arms enveloping them. Voices began to scream, filling the air with piercing sounds of suffering. When the explorers, with wounded souls and frightened spirits, finally made their way outside, they saw that the hospital building, which had previously seemed transformed and renewed, now radiated an aura of evil. It stood in darkness, as if the awakened souls had brought with them something sinister that could not be excluded from the past. Since that day, a sense of unease and fear had enveloped the town. The abandoned hospital, which had originally seemed a symbol of hope and healing, had become a curse, bringing with it dark secrets and ominous presences. Those who dared to re-explore its secrets were met with an unknown horror and lost a part of their soul in this gloomy place. Rumors that the abandoned hospital had returned to its former ominous state spread through the city, causing alarm and terror among the inhabitants. However, despite the warnings and cautionary tales, there were still those among the locals who were willing to venture inside the walls of this cursed building to find out what was going on. A new group of researchers, this time more experienced and armed with knowledge of supernatural phenomena, decided to take up the challenge and head inside the hospital. Their goal was to unravel the mysteries behind the return of evil and find a way to put an end to this nightmare. With the first steps inside the hospital, strange and inexplicable phenomena began. The light of the lanterns shook, and the shadows took the shape of monstrous figures. The sounds of moans and whispers grew louder, giving the illusion that the building itself was breathing suffering. They moved deeper inside, making their way through abandoned wards and dark corridors. In one room they discovered an ancient book written in an unknown language, apparently used in ancient rituals. This fact reinforced the researchers' certainty that past experiments in this place had awakened something sinister and ancient. As they approached the central part of the hospital, they heard a scream that seemed to echo with anguish, overshadowing all other sounds. In the next room they found an old room with an ancient altar in the center. The symbols and drawings on the walls seemed filled with ancient magic. The explorers realized that they were in the heart of a dark ritual that had been reactivated. Shadows, ghosts and moans became more and more apparent, giving the feeling that the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead was dissolving. In the blink of an eye, the room was filled with an aura of evil, and they felt dark forces begin to descend upon them. The walls seemed to breathe, and the air was saturated with a heavy and vile odor. In that instant, it seemed as if time stood still and the past returned, resurrecting dark moments forgotten for centuries. With each step deeper into the building, they felt their own fears and dark thoughts come to life. The explorers, clutching at the last vestige of their sanity, realized that to overcome this evil, they needed to quickly find a way to break the link between past and present before it consumed their own souls.